can we say that CARICOM is an equivalent of the African Union?
We were all European colonies.
Recently, the African Union accepted Israel as an observer.
But suffice to say, Israel is not an observer in the Caribbean community.
Why did it take so long for the heads of states to come together? Is CARICOM now represented as the African Union?
That's the million-dollar question. Queen of England is the symbolic head of state represented in Barbados.
Does that mean still the people of Barbados are paying tax to the Queen of England?
The Haitian Revolution is actually one of the cornerstones of world civilization. Yeah, they carried out genocide against the indigenous people that they found here in the Caribbean. Colonialism does rear its ugly head within our community. If we are going to make our way in this world, it makes sense for us to pursue that Pan-African agenda.
Hello, welcome to Connect Africa. So today we are going to talk about actually the Caribbean community known as the CARICOM. And here we have our guest, Ambassador David Commissiong. I hope I said it right. One of the things, welcome, Ambassador.
Thank you. Thank you.
One of the things that we focus here in Connect Africa is to talk about the African diaspora, African Union, and African returnees, the Africans who returned back to the continent. So it's in that manner that today we invited Ambassador David Comissiong to tell us, to shed a light on CARICOM, what it's doing, and what are the relations with Africa, and also all those things. We have a lot of questions. So let me say a little about Ambassador David Commissiong. He is currently ambassador to CARICOM under the Ministry of Foreign Affairs and Foreign Trade from Barbados, but he was born in St. Vincent, still in Caribbean, but he served really, you can say, from his biography, Caribbean, I can say, just to read some. He is a founder, member of the Caribbean Pan-African Network, the Claymont Pain Movement of Barbados, the Caribbean chapter of the International Network in Defense of Humanity, and the Global African Congress, and was an architect and the first director of the Barbados Government's Commission for Pan-African Affairs. Welcome again, Ambassador David Comissiong. Can we say that CARICOM is an equivalent of the African Union for Caribbean?
Yes, well, CARICOM, the Caribbean community, CARICOM is short for Caribbean Community, is the African Union of the Caribbean. So CARICOM started with the English-speaking territories of the Caribbean. I guess all of your listeners know the configuration of the Caribbean. It's basically a chain of islands running from the southern United States of America south to the northern tip of South America. Basically, a chain of islands that basically link North America with South America. We're in the Atlantic and facing Africa. Barbados is the most easterly of the chain of islands, so we are the closest to West Africa. So the Caribbean community started, we were all European colonies. So the Europeans colonized us. They
just like Africa.
Yeah, they carried out genocide against the indigenous people that they found here in the Caribbean. And when they needed a labor supply, they turned their eyes to Africa. And they enslaved Africans, brought them across the Atlantic to work on the plantations of the Caribbean. And, you know, we had English colonies, Spanish, French, Dutch. And so when the English colonies got their independence, we came together in a collective organization. It was first called CARIFTA, and then it evolved into CARICOM, Caribbean Community, in 1973. But it has expanded beyond just the English-speaking territories, because we have integrated Suriname, which is Dutch-speaking. We've also brought in Haiti, which is French-speaking. So CARICOM has 15 full member states. The larger ones would be Jamaica, Trinidad and Tobago, Guyana, Barbados, and then several of the smaller Eastern Caribbean islands. Of course, I've already mentioned Haiti, Suriname, and Belize in Central America. The Bahamas is the one furthest north in the Atlantic is the Bahamas. And then we have 5 associate members. These are Caribbean territories that are still colonies of various European countries. So Bermuda is an associate member. That's basically a British colony. British Virgin Islands, Turks and Caicos Islands, Cayman Islands, and Anguilla. So that's the Caribbean community. It's been in existence since 1973. Now, the Caribbean territories and Africa have had a long association. Of course, we have an association in terms of common ancestry, but also in terms of common political struggle. Before we were independent, the struggle for decolonization was basically led by Pan-Africanists and nationalist activists. So we shared, people from the Caribbean and Africa came together in that struggle. And most importantly, we look back to the 1945 5th Pan-African Congress that was held in Manchester in England, where people like Kwame Nkrumah, Jomo Kenyatta, George Padmore from the Caribbean, they came together and they planned as Pan-Africanists at that Congress. They planned the decolonization struggle. So they went back. Some went back to Africa, some went back to the Caribbean, and they fought for decolonization, independence, and they were successful. And so African countries began to become independent. Caribbean countries began to become independent. The African countries, once they became independent, they established the Organization of African Unity in 1963. Our Caribbean countries, we started with the Caribbean Free Trade Association between 1965 and 1968, and then that evolved into the Caribbean Community in 1973. So that's it. That's a brief snapshot of the history, and we just held. Well, we have worked, Africa and the Caribbean, we've worked together, for example, because we were all former colonies of Europe. At the time when the European Common Market was established, we came together, African countries, Caribbean and Pacific countries, to negotiate with the European Union. But that was a very limited association because that was coming together just for the purpose of negotiating with Europe. But that's part of our connection as well. But recently, on the 7th of September of this year, we held the first Africa Caribbean Community Heads of Government Summit. So that's where our relationship is right now.
That exactly will lead me to the next question. These two peoples, Africans and Caribbeans, who share a lot, in their culturally, socially, and politically also. Why did it take so long for the heads of states to come together while Africa had these meetings institutionally with the European Union and others, name it, both on the level of institution and on the level of countries like Africa, Turkey, Africa, Russia, many of them, and why it took so long?
That's the $1 million question. I asked that question myself. It's hard to understand that we could have established you know, the Organization of African Unity way back in 1963, and it's taken us so long. But something is obviously happening because last year, you know, I told you that we had this African, Caribbean, and Pacific mechanism for negotiating with the European Union. But last year, what we did, we said that it's not good enough that you know, our countries are only together in order to negotiate with Europe. Let's take that ACP group and let's establish a proper organization. So last year, we established the Organization of African, Caribbean, and Pacific States, right? OACPS. It is headquartered in Brussels, and so it's a very new entity, and we're still trying to flesh it out. So you know, we don't have a lot to report about that. But it shows that in recent years we have been thinking more ambitiously about coming together and being organized. Also, earlier this year, or perhaps late last year, we established at the United Nations an Africa CARICOM lobby. So we brought together our ambassadors at the United Nations to work together as a coherent lobby group in the United Nations. So that again signaled a new thinking. And now this is the most ambitious development, because at that Heads of Government Summit, it was proposed that we establish a permanent forum of African and Caribbean territories and states. So we propose to call it FACTS, F-A-C-T-S. And so, you know, that is very exciting, because, you know, while we establish this organization that's headquartered in Brussels with Pacific countries, but this one that we have agreed that we are going to establish, this permanent forum, you know, is very much cemented by the common ancestry between the African Caribbean people and the people of the African continent, our continental African brothers and sisters. And it is directly rooted in our common history of Pan-Africanism. So it is really representing a realization of some of the great dreams and visions of the great giants of Pan-Africanism. Edward Wilmot Blyden, Marcus Garvey, W.B. Du Bois, you know, George Padmore, Kwame Nkrumah, the great champions of Pan-Africanism. So yes, for me it was very exciting. And in the 3 years preceding the holding of this summit, we had quite a bit of interaction between the Caribbean and Africa. We had African presidents visiting the Caribbean. President Uhuru Kenyatta, he carried out a Caribbean visit in 2019. So too did President Nana Akufo-Addo of Ghana. And our leaders also reciprocated. So Prime Minister Mia Motley of Barbados, for example, she visited both Ghana and Kenya. She reciprocated visits. And Barbados, we have just established 2 embassies in Africa, one in Kenya and the other one in Ghana. So something is happening, something is in the air, and we are finally coming to the realization that we belong together.
Yeah, it's really interesting. I'm one of those people who do not believe that the first encounter was for Caribbean and African people was the slave trade, because I believe that Africans were everywhere before people discover other parts of the world, America, Asia or Australia. Yeah, that it took us so long. So the one you told me is activities on an institution level between CARICOM and AU are in the last few years, you know, kind of activated or initiated. Before that, it was not.
Yeah. I mean, we had, you know, we worked together, as I said, in the ACP, and we would have collaborated in various multilateral fora, but this is something new. This is a very conscious coming together. And, you know, as you say, they came before Columbus. There's a famous Guyanese scholar, Ivan van Sertima, who wrote the book, They Came Before Columbus, who chronicled the African presence in the Americas long before Christopher Columbus's voyage of 1492. So, yeah, so but you know, so that's part of our history, that we actually need to know a lot more about. But we are focusing on the more contemporary political developments, particularly since we established our independent sovereign nation states. And yes, you know.
Is CARICOM now represented at the African Union? And how many of the CARICOM states have any status, observer status or anything at the African Union level? Or in the
I mean, I think these are things that can happen now. CARICOM should have observer status at the African Union, and the African Union should have observer status at CARICOM. But everything is on the table now. The proposal is that the new permanent forum of African and Caribbean states will be serviced by the secretariats of CARICOM and the African Union. And in fact, we are hoping to sign a memorandum of understanding in a few weeks' time, in just a couple of weeks' time. Barbados is hosting the 15th United Nations Conference on Trade and Development. It's being hosted here in early October. So the plan is that the CARICOM Secretariat and the African Union Secretariat will have prepared a memorandum of understanding that both CARICOM and the African Union will sign at the UNCTAD, on the margins of the UNCTAD conference here in Barbados in a couple of weeks' time, fleshing out the road ahead for this new permanent forum of African and Caribbean states. And it's proposed that henceforth, every 7th of September would be recognized as Africa CARICOM Day, and that we will have a summit meeting of our heads of government, an annual summit meeting every 7th of September. So the thinking is that the two secretariats will prepare all of the work for the establishment of this new organization, and that it will be inaugurated at the 2022 summit meeting on the 7th of September 2022. So, you know, it's a very exciting development.
Yeah, as you said, something is on the air. It's progressing. Good to hear that. It's better than nothing is going on, definitely. But I really would like to ask you this, Eva. I really would like to ask this because my viewers want to get an answer. Recently, the African Union accepted Israel as an observer in the African Union. And many people are talking, especially African descent and the African diaspora, which is considered as the 6th region, but nothing is, the progress hasn't been that much. How do you perceive this as as an ambassador to, how do you personally, as representing CARICOM, how is it perceived?
Well, it wouldn't be right for me to take a position on that. That is for the African Union to take a position. But my understanding is that it was the chairman of the African Union Commission who unilaterally took this step of inviting or permitting Israel to be an observer. But my understanding is that there are several African Union member states that don't agree. And so I believe, I don't think we have heard the end of this. I think it would probably be resolved among the African Union heads of government. But suffice to say, Israel is not an observer in the Caribbean community, you know. But I wouldn't want to comment anymore because it wouldn't really be right for me to comment on the internal affairs of the African Union.
Fair enough. Let's talk about now, so far we talked about on the level of institution, let's talk about like people to people. For me, I believe, if I am mistaken, I will be happy to be corrected. The first initiative like by an African leader to invite African people who are outside of Africa to come and live was His Imperial Majesty Haile Selassie invites them during, of course, following what they did when Italy invaded Ethiopia, which is in the 1940s. And then recently another action was taken. Actually, Kwame Nkrumah also did that, but then very recently in 2019, Ghana dedicated the year as the year of return, and many people with African descent from Caribbean and even from America, from Europe, visited and planned, you know, many things have gone, and you know, things have progressed in that direction. Do you think more of such initiatives could have filled the gap in the rapprochement of between the two people? Yeah.
I want to tell you about an initiative that precedes even the emperor's offer of Shashamane to the Rastafari. Way back in 1930, there was a famous Barbadian, a black Jew by the name of Rabbi Arnold Josiah Ford. And at the time of Emperor Selassie's coronation, he led a back to Africa migration to Ethiopia. The whole idea was to set up an agricultural settlement of black people from the Americas. And he was granted an area of 700 acres of land to set up the agricultural settlement. So even before the Rastafari, the emperor had made such a gesture. And they did come, they did set up the settlement, but the whole thing collapsed when the Italians invaded Ethiopia. Well, once the Italians were on the verge of invading, a lot of the blacks that had repatriated fled the country. You know. Anyhow, so that's just part of the history. Rabbi Arnold Ford, he did not flee. In fact, he died in Ethiopia, and his wife, Mignon Lorraine Innes Ford, she went on to play a very important role in Ethiopia during the Italian occupation and after. But anyhow, so yes, so you know, it's important, I guess, that we record all of these efforts at the people linkages and the return home. I need to say as well that the African Union, you mentioned the African Union 6-region diaspora initiative. Well, I've been very much a part of that, because in addition to being Barbados's ambassador to CARICOM, in my civil society life, I am also the chairman of the Caribbean Pan-African Network. That's a civil society network of Pan-Africanists across the Caribbean. Our headquarters is in Trinidad and Tobago, and we were established in 2004 in collaboration with the African Union. We were established as the entity that would organize the Caribbean region to participate in the 6-region civil society initiative. So we have worked with the African Union's ECOSOC, for example. But you're quite right. That six-region initiative has gone very, very slowly. One of the reasons for that is that it has proven very difficult to organize several areas of the diaspora. In fact, I think perhaps the Caribbean is the only area that has been properly, acceptably organized, but it's proved very difficult to put organization in place in North America, in Europe. There is a similar network in Australia, but it's been difficult. So I've been involved in it since 2004. So yes, efforts like that have been made at the people level, at the civil society level, and kudos to the African Union for having that vision, for having that initiative, and for making that outreach. But as I said, it has gone slowly. The good thing about the Caribbean is that the Caribbean is essentially an area of predominantly Black or African nation states and governments. So because we are governments, because we are independent states, it is easier now for government to government come together to make agreements, to develop relationships. And I think this coming together of the African and Caribbean governments is going to establish a more secure platform on which we can build all kinds of people-to-people initiatives and programs and contacts.
Interesting when you raised the Ford family who came in the 1930s, much before the emperor's official invitation to the Black people. Yeah, I have had a chance to meet their son, Professor Abbey Ford, and he told me about the history of his parents. And yeah, his house is really like a museum. And speaking of that, I know also you have written a book about them, which I really would like to read that book and meet you again for another interview. But this interview is not finished, not yet. When we think of, I am an Ethiopian, so when I was in Ethiopia, thinking of a Caribbean, there's always these things that people associate, like the Rastafari or Jamaica. There are certain things that comes to one's image or one's mind. So certainly if there's anything that served as a bridge to feel the presence of, well, it could be the culture, the music, or the food or anything of a Caribbean in Ethiopia is channeled through the Rastafari community. Does CARICOM maintain connection or give recognition to this community in Africa, or you also officially somehow use them to bridge that cultural gap?
Well, the Rastafari had a very difficult time, even in the Caribbean. Rastafari was formed basically in 1930, inspired by Marcus Garvey and the Marcus Garvey movement, but also by the coronation of Emperor Selassie, that this king would arise in the East. So it was like a prophecy fulfilled, yes, and it started in Jamaica, and because it was challenging the norms of that colonial, Eurocentric society at the time, there was a lot of resistance. We have to give, and even a lot of oppression, especially in Jamaica. I mean, even state-sponsored violence against the Rastafarian community. But the Rastafarian community held firm to this idea of an African identity and the notion of repatriation to the African continent and to Ethiopia in particular.
Yeah.
And in many ways, they have prevailed. You know, the world has come to respect so much about the Rastafari movement, their music, for example, but many of their culinary practices and their emphasis on healthy living and natural living and natural food, and the idea of a Black or African-centered religion, an African concept of God, and so forth. So Rastafari is a very powerful Caribbean aspect of the Caribbean culture that has really been exported all around the world. So yes, we know that even now, I mean, in the Caribbean, the Rastafari represent Ethiopia. They fly the flag of Ethiopia. They represent the colors of Ethiopia. So the Rastafari are a very good link between the Caribbean and certainly Ethiopia in particular, but Africa in general. But we have had the development of consciousness in our region. We have come from that colonial past more and more. We have thrown off those old colonial shackles. I can tell you that on the 30th of November of this year, Barbados, my country, will become a republic. You know, because although we are independent, several of our countries still maintain a symbolic link with the monarchy of England. So many of our countries, even though they're independent, they maintained the British monarch as their symbolic head of state. So right now in Barbados, the Queen of England is the symbolic head of state, represented in Barbados by a Barbadian representative or governor general. But we have come to the consciousness that that state of affairs is not acceptable. That, you know, if we are independent, we can't have any of those lingering colonial connections. So we are totally removing the link with the British monarchy. And on the 30th of November, we will become the Republic of Barbados. You know, our head of state will be totally Barbadian. So last year we took down the statue of Admiral Nelson, the great British imperial hero. This statue stood in the heart of our capital city since it was put up in 1813. So it was taken down after 207 years. And it was taken down not in any contentious way. It was taken down by the government and people of Barbados acting together. And so we're gonna find a more appropriate symbol that will symbolize, you know, the coming together of the Black family to put in that important location in the heart of our capital city. So the point I'm making is that we are on a journey as well, a journey towards greater African consciousness, a greater exploration and acceptance of our history as an African people, and we recognize that if we are going to make our way in this world, it makes sense for us to pursue that Pan-African agenda with our brothers and sisters on the continent of Africa. Africa now has the African Continental Free Trade Area.
Yes.
We are building something called the Caribbean Single Market and Single Economy.
Which you have, by the way, before even the establishment of CARICOM itself, or no?
So CARICOM, this is a project of CARICOM.
Oh, okay.
So the single market and single economy is basically, although we are all separate nations, what we are saying is that we want to make this Caribbean region a common economic space where there are no barriers to trade, there There are no barriers to people moving for, business activity, a common market and economy, a single market and economy. And so if we can establish our single market, our space, if we can transform our space into a single market and economy. On the African side, you have the African continental free trade area. The only thing separating us is the Atlantic pond. I don't want to call it the Atlantic Ocean. It's a pond, the little pond. If you get on a boat on the west coast of Africa, you'll probably just drift to Barbados. So we have to see it not as a great divide. We have to see it as a little pond that we can straddle in both directions. So there's a lot for us to gain by coming together and working together.
Speaking of Barbados, still the symbolic government is the Queen of England. I know that even if Africa, that many of or the 55 countries are republic or democratic, they're all independent. Yes, colonialism has gone, but neo-colonialism is fully present, and we know how France is still so much present in the Western Africa, and the same is experienced also in Caribbean. Haiti also is suffering really from that shackle, what has been done by the atrocities of the French government continuously. Is there any, anything, what, as the African Union is mostly criticized, for it not to take action whenever a non-African state come and intervene in the affairs of the continent? That's what it's known for mostly. Is it the same when we come to CARICOM, like, for example, what's happening in Haiti, or even for Barbados? What are the things that you try to do really to make that island or country independent?
Well, Haiti is a special case within CARICOM. You say France, but it's not just France, it's also the United States. The United States invaded Haiti in 1915 and occupied Haiti for 20 years. And some people will say they never left Haiti. Even after the occupation ended, they've never really left. So yes, there's France, there's United States, there's Canada, there's the Organization of American States. There are many powerful outside entities that have a presence in Haiti, and therefore make it very difficult for Haiti to truly be independent and sovereign. But when we accepted Haiti into CARICOM, I think we recognized that Haiti would come in with a lot of problems. I mean, Haiti is the poorest country in the Caribbean community. There are lots of challenges with Haiti, but I think our leaders recognize that Haiti was so important to the Caribbean. The Haitian Revolution is really the foundation of the destruction of slavery in the Caribbean. The Haitian Revolution is one of the cornerstones of our Caribbean civilization, and let me say as well that the Haitian Revolution is actually one of the cornerstones of world civilization, because we talk about the French Revolution and the American Revolution, but the French Revolution and the American Revolution were very incomplete revolutions in that they still recognize the enslavement of human beings. The Haitian Revolution was the first one to strike out for the complete freedom of humanity, regardless of skin color or race. So the Haitian Revolution is morally superior to either the American Revolution or the French Revolution, for that matter. So Haiti is very important, and I think that's why we accepted Haiti as a member state. Having said that, I think we are still struggling to see, how we can really fully integrate Haiti and be of real help to Haiti in terms of its development. So yes, so Haiti is a special case within CARICOM. In terms of, I would say that in terms of neocolonialism and outside forces having control and intervening, it's a mixed bag. It depends a lot on the strength of the individual territorial government. We do find, okay, one of the aspirations of CARICOM is to develop a collective foreign policy. But we do find that on some issues, you do have powerful big countries who try to divide and rule, who try to get among us, to divide us. And depending on the ideological complexion of the government of the member state, some member states are more easily drawn into carrying out the agenda, let's say, of a United States or some big power. So it is not easy, but I would say that we do have a number of very strong leaders within the Caribbean community that understand that we are a community of principle, that our ancestors didn't fight all of those battles against enslavement, against all the indignity, went through all that suffering for us now to simply be anybody's playthings, you know? So yes, I mean, I can't give you a definitive answer. Yes, at times colonialism does rear its ugly head within our community, but for small territories, I would say that for small territories with limited material power, that the Caribbean community has done exceedingly well in adopting a principled foreign policy. For example, I'll give you one example. Back in 1972, when only 4 of our countries were independent, Jamaica, Trinidad and Tobago, Guyana, and Barbados, Cuba, revolutionary Cuba, was virtually totally isolated within our hemisphere by the United States and the Organization of American States. They're totally isolated revolutionary Cuba. And it was these 4 small Caribbean nations that defied the United States and the Organization of American States and gave diplomatic recognition to Cuba. And that kind of broke the ice. Once these 4 small Caribbean states did so, then much larger states followed that example. And Cuba then had diplomatic recognition right across the region. So we do have examples like that of our countries being very principled. In 2019, when it seemed as if they were getting ready to invade Venezuela, we stepped forward as well and we said, no, our region must be a zone of peace. There must be no military intervention in Venezuela, and we tried as best we could to help, insist that there must be a dialogue of peace, and Venezuela's rights must be respected. And at the summit on the 7th, one of the things that came out of the summit was a demand that those powerful countries that are currently imposing an embargo on Cuba and also imposing sanctions on Zimbabwe, we call
and as we speak also on Ethiopia, by the way.
Well, yes, we need to know more. We need to know more about that conflict in Ethiopia. That's one of the things why we need to come together, because we only pick up some news from the American or European news agencies, the CNN and the BBC. We don't know enough. For example, about that conflict that is right now going on in Ethiopia. Or you're telling me now that you're facing sanctions.
Yes.
We need to know more. We need to know more about that. See.
which which I would love to enlighten, you know, in any platform that allows me to do so. Because just imagine, not only for Ethiopia but for others, how effective will it be when CARICOM and the African Union, all member states, come together? That's already more than 1/4 of the votes in the United Nations, and it's really huge. And my next question is, still my mind is on, just to make it clear, Ambassador, out of curiosity, and yeah, for it to be in easy language, what does it mean when a state is independent and also is, okay, the symbolic government is some by its previous colonial power? What does it mean? Does that mean still the people of Barbados are paying tax to the Queen of England? Or yeah, explain to us.
No. So right now, the head of government of Barbados is the Prime Minister of Barbados, elected by the people of Barbados. So the real power is with the head of government, or the Prime Minister, and the Prime Minister's ministers. The head of state is not the real power. It's more of a symbolic position. So the head of state is, but you know, a prime minister is still a political office, you know, because you have political parties and you have political contests, and to see who becomes government. So the idea of having a head of state separate from a prime minister is that the head of state is supposed to be totally non-political, and is supposed to be a symbol of national unity and so forth. So when we became independent in 1966, a decision was made at that time to still permit the Queen of England to retain that symbolic office as head of state. Okay, but the real power in terms of government is not with the head of state. It's with the prime minister, the head of government. You see, but the symbolism is important, and we recognize that even though we may say, oh, it's only symbolic, she doesn't have a role in our governance affairs, and in any case, she acts through a local representative, a Barbadian representative, but still the symbolism is important. We don't want to have this symbolism that we are a predominantly Black nation, making our way in the world, but when you look over our shoulder, you still see looming the image of the Queen of England. So there are 9 Caribbean community states that are still in that situation. Not all. Trinidad is already a republic. Dominica is a republic. Guyana is a republic. Suriname and Haiti. So the other 9 remaining monarchies. So Barbados will now join the group of republics. And it's my hope that the example of that Barbados will be a positive example for the remaining 8 to do likewise. And I say that because Barbados was really like the British mother colony in the Caribbean. So if Barbados can do it, okay. if the country that was the mother colony that used to be known as Little England, Barbados was known as Little England. Wow. So if we can do it, surely the others can do it as well. So it is my vision really is that all of the nations of the Caribbean community become republics, and that we go on to decolonize the entire Caribbean region. Because truth be told, the Caribbeans, the region of the world that still has perhaps the most remaining colonial territories is the Caribbean. I mean, we still have Dutch territories, as you know.
Dutch Antilles, yes.
We still have French colonies, Martinique, Guadeloupe, French Guyana. We still have British colonies, British Virgin Islands, Turks and Caicos, and so forth. We have US colonies, the United States Virgin Islands, Puerto Rico. So this, for me, is unacceptable.
Yeah.
Our ambition has to be to totally decolonize the entire Caribbean region and to build a unified Caribbean civilization, you know, that must be as united and as strong as it possibly can be. So that has to be our vision for the future.
Yeah, we really hope so that that will be implemented, and soon all Caribbean states will be republic states. That's my hope. Let's go back to CARICOM, the institution itself. What are the objectives? For what purpose this? You touched it somehow in the beginning, but if we can just say this and this, that, and then kind of assessing it, do you think it fulfilled its purpose? I think it's going to be nearly 50 years. Am I right soon or no?
73. Yes.
Yeah. How do you assess CARICOM? What were the purposes? Well, and yeah, seeing it from that angle.
So we have our headquarters, our CARICOM Secretariat, located in Guyana. CARICOM, as I said, we started as the Caribbean Free Trade Association. So initially, it was about free trade. It was about these territories removing all barriers to trade between themselves and being able to trade goods freely. And then we went from just free trade, we went to a common market where we said, in addition to removing barriers, we are going to emphasize regional industries. So we are going to have a common external tariff against imports coming in so that we could protect our space for our own manufacturers and agriculturalists and develop industry. And then we said we have to go beyond that. There's some things that we need to do together that we can do better together than every nation trying to do on its own. So functional cooperation. So for example, in the area of university education, we have a collective University of the West Indies. We have a Caribbean Development Bank that services all of the territory, and I can go on and on. So we actually have 17 institutions of CARICOM that deal with it, from education to agricultural development. So you know, climate change, renewable energy, tourism, you name it. And we have 8 associate institutions of CARICOM. So functional cooperation is a big part of it as well. And then we said we need a collective, a common foreign policy and a common economic foreign policy in relation to outside entities. And then finally, we said, well, the final stage in our integration, because it's really an integration mechanism, is a single market and a single economy. And what we mean by that, well, a single market means that we want to make it possible for people, for goods, for businesses, just to be able to move freely and to interact within our space. And then the single economy is where we harmonize all of our laws, our regulations, our policies, so that we operate, even though we are different countries, we operate as if we are really one single country, you know, with
Is that a single currency fall into that? Because obviously I was thinking,
yeah, that would be the final block in the process, because right now we have Barbados has its own dollar. The smaller Eastern Caribbean countries, they have an Eastern Caribbean dollar. Jamaica has its own dollar, and so forth. So the common currency would be the culmination of the single economy. When you have harmonized fiscal policies and incentive policies, and then the final building block would be that single currency. So that's our project. That's our integration project. I make bold to say that it is quite a successful. I mean, we are very critical of the project in the Caribbean. Mm-hmm. So we criticize it for moving too slowly and all the rest of it. But when we really take a step back and we look at all the aspects, for example, if a hurricane hits the Caribbean territory, we have a collective agency, the Caribbean Disaster Emergency Management Agency, that responds collectively. COVID, we have the Caribbean Public Health Agency. So every country is not left to deal with a public health crisis alone. We have the regional institutions. So when we look and assess all of the aspects of CARICOM, I think we have done quite well. And in terms of integration projects worldwide, I don't think there are many that would be ranked higher than the CARICOM project. I mean, the European Union had Brexit. They had, Britain pulling out. We have never had any member state pulling out, for example. So I think all things considered, we have done pretty good for ourselves.
So people should look at those positive results instead of. It's the same is true for the African Union, but one step at a time. Sometimes we should be able to appreciate what has been done and then build on that. What would be your advice for CARICOM and the African Union, and even in terms of people-to-people areas to work together and fight the common challenges that they both face in terms of
Well, I've always said, because I'm a Pan-Africanist, right? I mean, I was a Pan-Africanist before I became the Barbados Ambassador to CARICOM. My whole adult career has centered around Pan-Africanism, and I really push for this summit because I've always said that once the political leaders of the Caribbean and Africa sit down around a table and start to talk to each other, many good things are going to come out of that process. And if we look at, I have here, this is the communique. You really need to get a copy of the communique that was issued at the end of the summit. Very detailed. And I mean, it's from the current COVID-19 crisis, the vaccine apartheid that has been inflicted on the world, the need for us to produce. Well, we can be quite proud in the Caribbean that a Caribbean country, Cuba, has produced 2 COVID vaccines thus far, the Abdala and the Soberana vaccines. And they're now in the process of getting World Health Organization certification for these 2 vaccines. But so part of the discussion at the summit was about the need for us to work, Caribbean and Africa, to fight this vaccine apartheid, to insist that we must be able to manufacture and produce vaccines in Africa, in the Caribbean, that we are going to insist that the international financial institutions and the multilateral agencies must do much more to respond to the crisis that has been inflicted on the Caribbean and Africa by this COVID pandemic. The Caribbean has suffered tremendously. Because most of our economies are based on tourism, and there was a collapse of tourism. But we need more financial support from the international financial institutions. Climate change. the blue economy, the oceans. We share the South Atlantic Ocean in common, you know. So all of those ideas about preserving the oceans and building the blue economy. And then there were a number of reparations. We said we must work together on reparatory justice, including the reparative restructuring of the international economic and political order. Then there's
is this the result of also the summit? Because I've gone through it, and mostly, yes, it's about mostly COVID. Yes, it's a big problem both in the continent and in Caribbean. But I was missing also like more a political statement and that commitment, I think, in my view, at least.
Oh, well, you have to read the communique carefully, but it does take aim at the unjust international global order, and that we must assert ourselves to restructure it. It does urge both regions to press for reparative justice, and in fact, the second to last paragraph calls upon all of the African and Caribbean states to participate fully in the high-level Durban commemorative meeting at the UN on the 22nd of September, and to use that event to advance the claim for reparations within the UN processes. It does demand the removal of the embargo against Cuba and the sanctions against Zimbabwe, and it also looks to a number of practical projects that the Caribbean and Africa could put in place, from regular airline flights, a multilateral air services agreement, removal of visa requirements for travel between the two regions. There was a call for the removal. I see within the communique they've reduced that call to a review of visa requirements. That we establish African Caribbean public-private institutional structure to mobilize resources to develop, important cutting-edge projects. But I think the most important thing is that we are committing to establishing an institutional structure. We are committing to an annual coming together of the heads of government every year, and it is that structure that would provide a platform for us to do a lot more. But you need to read the communique carefully. This was a 2.5-hour confab. 17 presidents and prime ministers spoke. Also, important officials like the chair of the African Union Commission, the Secretary General of CARICOM, the president of the Caribbean Development Bank, etc. But a lot of content came out of that fairly limited exchange between the political leaderships of. So you obviously expected more. What would you have liked to see that is not here?
Yes, we're going to remove the visa and we're going to start this trade, and this airline from Africa will start to fly, and more practical things, and CARICOM will be from now on an observer.
No, we have even gone beyond observer, because we are saying we are establishing a permanent forum that will be serviced by both secretariats. So, and we have said that this summit was held on the 7th of September. We are expecting and hoping that by the time of the UNCTAD meeting in Barbados, and I think that's about maybe the 4th or 5th of October, that the African Union and CARICOM will sign the memorandum of understanding to put all of this in place, so that by the 7th of September 2022, the entire thing is launched. So I would say that this was a very good work was done here. And if you just read the beginning phases of it, it's very much focused on COVID. I mean, it's focused on the immediate life and death situation that we all face, COVID and vaccines and so forth. But as you get further into the document, you will see that it is actually fleshing out an anti-imperialist ideology for the new forum, anti-imperialist in the sense of recognizing that the contemporary world order is one that does an injustice to African and Caribbean nations and people, and that we need to reform it, and committing ourselves really to putting a structure in place that will permit us to work together as a partnership. So I'm happy with it.
No, honestly. It's good to hear that, yeah, which is important. Finally, Ambassador, I would like to give you the opportunity, if you have any message to the youth, the civil society organizations in Africa, in the diaspora, in Caribbean, to work in terms of in the rapprochement of the two peoples, the people from Caribbean and the people from Africa. What will be your message? Yeah.
Well, my message is that we have to make this the African century. We have to make this the African century. We are facing, we have to be very clear. We have to be very blunt. We have to be very open. We are facing some enormous challenges, from climate change to powerful European and North American countries and organizations seemingly intent on continuing to dominate this world, showing very little concern for developing countries like those of the Caribbean and Africa. And we have a lot of battles to fight. But we can fight those battles, provided we can establish unity. And so while we recognize the serious challenges we face, while we recognize that power concedes nothing without a struggle, I think we should recognize that we are very powerful if only we come together. And I would like us all to recognize the importance of this step that has been made here, and the potential of this step to be the foundation for that very strong Pan-African unity. But we now have to make sure that this doesn't just remain on paper, that it is actually implemented, and that there's no lag or no lapse in its implementation. So we have to make sure that by September of 2022, this entire structure is in place, and we are really moving. Because part of the idea, that came out in the discussions, particularly from the Prime Minister of St. Vincent, is that we should be working towards, yes, okay, we are beginning with the governments, but we should be actually laying a platform for to move beyond the governments and to really bring in all of our people in the diaspora of Europe, North America, and Latin America. And so a lot will depend on doing this right and creating a very firm foundation of unity. So I just want to encourage everybody to pay attention to this. Right now, what we have learned from the COVID-19 pandemic is that we can make a lot more use of this communications technology, things that we didn't know we could do before in being in contact with each other and talking to each other. We have learned, or we've been forced because of COVID, to make a lot more use of the technology. So let's use it, and let's very consciously and very deliberately just build these relations, and let's make this let's make this the foundation of it. That would be my parting words.
Good to know. We will share that communique maybe when we also show this video. Thank you very much, Ambassador Comissiong, really, for your time. And I'm sure our viewers will learn a lot. Yeah, thank you. And this will not be the first time. This will not be the only one. Hopefully we will meet again. Definitely after I read that book, that I can assure you.
Yes, I look forward to having that conversation with you after you read
yes,
the Pan-African love story of Arnold and Mignon Ford. And I want to let your viewers know that it's not a romance novel. Yes, Arnold and Mignon were husband and wife. So it tells that story, but it's more about the love story of love for Africa, love for Ethiopia, love for Pan-Africanism, love for education. So but after you read it, we'll discuss.
Yeah, here I am in front of the viewers. I'm promising this will be the tributary for me to Professor Abi Ford, whom I am really greatly indebted for his knowledge and everything. Yes, and thank you for writing that book as well. Yes, and yeah, thank you, our viewers. Hopefully you have learned a lot from this video, and if you like it and find it interesting, share it with your friends and with your network, and give it a like, and also be a family of Connect Africa. Thank you, Ambassador.
My pleasure. I enjoyed it. Thanks.
Bye.